This vintage, it's as significant to us as our first vintage in 98 in terms of, the excitement around it and the quality of the vintage. And then I have a few other favourites along the way. But 25 is, I can't wait to get those wines in bottle.
Welcome to Series 3 of Healthy Minds, Healthy Vines, a podcast proudly developed by the Wine Grape Council of South Australia and hosted by Callum McPherson and Nick Ryan. I'm Lisa Bonnier, CEO of the Council, and I'm delighted to bring you this series. The Wine Grape Council of South Australia represents our state's independent wine grape growers. We aim to provide growers with timely support and effective representation through advocacy, collaboration and knowledge building. South Australia is home to just over half of Australia's vineyard area, and it's the diversity of our independent growers, their stories, challenges and opportunities that shows just how important connection is in grape growing. In this new series, we bring you 10 unique conversations, sharing a rich mix of views, experiences, knowledge and questions from across our grape and wine community. From personal journeys to practical insights, each episode is designed to spark thought, build connection and support well-being in our industry. So wherever you're listening, in the vineyard, on the road or at home, we invite you to tune in and be part of building healthy minds and healthy vines together.
Kim Longbottom's story is one of adaptability, resilience and quiet determination. Originally from New Zealand, she built a life on the Limestone Coast, growing a highly successful wine brand with her husband Mark in Padthaway. When Mark was diagnosed with cancer in the early 2000s, they faced it with defiance and optimism, always believing he'd make it through. Years later, leukaemia tragically claimed his life when their daughter Margo was just 10 years old, leaving Kim with the world on her shoulders. She's never stopped moving forward, balancing single motherhood with the demands of business, thinking ahead and embracing the next challenge. Today she runs Vintage Longbottom alongside Margo, continuing to adapt to the ever-evolving world of wine. Here's Kim Longbottom.
Kim, can you paint a picture of the part of New Zealand that you're from?
I can. I grew up in a very remote area of the South Island at the very top, so either further north than Wellington. So we were on a farm, a sheep and cattle farm there. So it was like a 3.5-hour drive from the nearest town in the region of Marlborough, the province of Marlborough. So brought up in a very rich food and wine province. So always around food and wine with my parents growing up. So I guess that was probably the start of my love of wine and food and entertaining and bringing people together.
Food and wine and horses.
Oh, yeah, and horses, yes. I used to ride a lot when I was a kid. And then in my 20s, I moved to Sydney and just loved being outside. So I worked on various different horse farms kind of on the outskirts of Sydney, ranging from Arabian horse studs to endurance farms to racehorse pre-training farms. So it was very much a work hard, play hard kind of 20s in Sydney.
And is that what brought you over to Australia?
No, my parents had moved here. So, and I was living in a small town in Marlborough called Blenheim, and I just kind of outgrew that and thought, Sydney looked like fun. And initially I thought I would go for a few months and just see how I felt about living in Sydney and just stayed. I stayed in Sydney for 6 or 7 years and then moved to South Australia. I loved it. It reminded me of New Zealand and just the food and wine culture as well, and met my late husband, Mark, when I was here.
So what year did you meet Mark?
95. So he was a vigneron in Padthaway, so born and bred in Padthaway. And we met, and not long after that I moved to Padthaway, and that's where we sort of started our wine business.
How did you meet?
I met Mark at a friend's shack in Kingston, and I guess we just kind of hit it off right from the get-go, and he sort of said, "Have you been to Padthaway before?" And I said, "Years ago, I went to a clearing sale. These people were moving to New Zealand." He said, "Oh, that was my auntie and uncle."
I think everyone in Padthaway was, somehow related.
I know. Yeah. It is kind of tiny. And people said, "Oh, did you struggle moving from Sydney to Padthaway, and I said not really, because I was brought up in such a remote area of New Zealand. It was, it kind of conditioned me for life in Padthaway. But I guess along our wine journey, we travelled a lot as well, so that was nice, but always lovely to come home.
Yeah, tell us a bit about the man Mark was.
He was a farmer, loved the land, loved growing things. So we had not so much, the Longbottoms are not so much stock people, but they're very good at growing crops, anything really. So we used to have a lot of sort of broadacre crops, and then they started planting vineyards in the early 90s, and he was never happier than when he was in the vineyard. Loved wine, loved food. We used to entertain a lot. Yeah, so, and he loved to travel and he loved to read.
Real commonalities there. I never knew Mark, but I knew a long time.
Yeah.
A lot of what you're saying sort of describes, you in a way as well.
Yeah, and I guess that's why, like, right from the start, we got along really well and a lot of things in common. But I did get to Padthaway and thought, what am I going to do here, in terms of work? And I worked in the vineyards for a bit, pruning, but didn't love it. I didn't find it as challenging as what I would have liked. And then after a couple of years, actually, it was the year we were married. So actually, we were married in 97, and in 98, we started making our wine. So that was also the year that Margo was born.
So start a wine business, have a kid.
Yeah.
Big year.
Yeah. And a good year too, a good vintage. So, it was good timing.
Was that always the plan with the vineyards to establish a wine brand, or how did that come about?
Not so much. I mean, it was always talked about, but I guess Mark and I were more passionate about it, and I saw it as a way for me to have, a project that I could work on that was going to be challenging and rewarding, and that we loved together. So we kind of led the charge with that. And, back then in 98, which was such a great vintage to launch a wine brand, it was a far different landscape to what the wine market is now globally. And I guess we had early success in the US, and it was, one container or two, so vastly different to what it is now. So hopefully everything goes full circle.
Yeah, I mean, almost underselling it a little bit, sort of saying some early success. I mean, it was really successful, Henry's Drive.
Yeah.
Went bang.
It did. And I think, it was a combination of, having great winemakers. We had Sparky and Sarah Marquis making our wines back when they were making Fox Creek wines. They introduced us to an American importer at the time that was doing exceptionally well. The dollar was in our favour. It was at 50 cents. So, everything aligned. So it was... It was, a certain amount of luck, but also hard work. We had the right packaging. Matt Renfrey did that for us, and has continued to do all of our design works since then. So, and that's what, one of the things I love about the wine industry is the relationships you form and how lasting they are.
Yeah. How steep was that sort of acceleration curve through that period, and how did you service a hungry American market with, such, in the very early days with, young Margo and everything else?
Given that they just had such an insatiable appetite for Australian wine, we didn't need to travel in the market as much as what perhaps we did in the later years. Yeah. Sparky and Sarah would travel and represent our wines as well. Mark and I would go from time to time, or I would go. And it did, the Henry's Drive brand did accelerate reasonably quickly for a premium brand. But the real acceleration in that market was when we launched the Pillar Box Red label in 2004. So that was, quite the juggernaut for us.
What was your philosophy from the start?
It all begins in the vineyard. Good fruit, like the right style of wine as well. So I think, a more modern contemporary style. I guess Padthaway wasn't always seen as a premium producer of branded wine. So, and having the right packaging and the right relationships with your trading partners, distributors, also winemakers, and just being very hands-on right the way through, and everything's about attention to detail. You can't have good wine in a, ordinary-looking branded package, and then also forget about the distribution, which, we all know distribution's king. So
yeah, so obviously, that is probably crucial, isn't it, to try and run a business that's doing a lot in the States from, a reasonably remote place like Padthaway. There needs to be a fair amount of, reliance on the chain of command, I guess, going the way through, and trust to the people that you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. And back then it was easier to achieve that. And with Pillowbox Red, for example, that I guess that sort of came about because we had quite large vineyard holdings in Padthaway, and some of our contracts were running out, and we just thought, we need to create our own market for this fruit. So we thought about what we would make, and we thought, right, a $12 wine, a red blend. Our American importers said, no, do a Shiraz, a Cabernet and a Merlot. And we thought, well, we'll fly through the Shiraz, the Cabernet will sell and we'll be left with the Merlot. So we thought, no, one wine, a lovely blend, really good package. We selected a great winemaker. So Chris Ringland made our wine. I've made Pillowbox Red from the 2004 vintage. Again, Matt Rettenfrey designed a really smart, contemporary, bright red package. And back then, there was a lot of critter labels in the US market, and people were getting a bit tired of those. And so I think, everything aligned for us. It was, the market in that space, in that sort of $10 to $15 category, there wasn't a lot of estate-grown red blends. There was a lot of big company critter labels. So I think we were lucky. Chris Ringland was a pretty popular winemaker in the US, had a bit of a cult following and still does. So, we made, in the first vintage, we made 64,000 dozen and sold out in 10 months. Yeah, those were the days.
Those were the days. Did you ever think that, it was going to last forever?
I guess we were just riding the wave and didn't really think about that. When it started to decline in distribution and getting harder to sell, I think it was really about, the exchange rate, it had gone through parity. So we couldn't remain as competitive as we were in the market. I guess it was the start of the Australian category not being as popular in the US market. And I looked at the brand and I thought, I need to really reinvigorate this brand or, find it a new home. And that's what I decided to do, because it was just the margins were getting squeezed and it wasn't as much fun, making that amount of wine, for, very little margin. So I just thought, no, I don't want to be in this category anymore and just focus on the premiums.
Yeah. And, when things were going, seemingly, so well, life has a funny way of, kicking in the ass.
Yes.
Mark gets sick.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that process.
Mark first was diagnosed with cancer in 2004, so the year we started the Pillowbox project, and he had gastro cancer then. So he had treatment for that while we were building our cellar door and launching this big volume brand. So he had very successful treatment and was in remission from cancer. Then 2 years later, he went back for a checkup, and they found after numerous tests that he had leukemia. So that was, again, like, okay, next challenge. Right, let's hit it head on. He had treatment for leukemia here, which was a stem cell transplant that engrafted and was successful, but only for about 6 months, and his disease returned. So in Australia at the time, they didn't do a second transplant. They just didn't have the experience to do that, I guess. So we decided that we would travel to Houston in Texas to the MD Anderson, and he would have a second transplant over there. So again, we thought we would be away for 6 weeks. We were away for 6 months.
Yeah.
Because if you want to get sick, go to a hospital. So he had numerous infections, and then we had trouble finding a matching donor. So once we found the donor, we lined up. We got Mark to the point where he was healthy enough to have a transplant. We had all that lined up, and of course there was a hurricane coming into Houston, so they locked down all the hospitals for 3 days. So they said to me, you either have to stay here or go for 3 days. And Mark said, go back and look after Margo. We had a nanny, but he, decided that that's where I'd be the most help. So I went back. The hospital rang me the next morning and they said, look, Mark's had his transplant, but things haven't gone to plan. He's not well. And they said, you need to get in here now. So, yeah, he'd had his transplant that also engrafted, but then because he had no immune system, they wipe out your immune system so you can accept the new stem cells. He got a really bad infection and didn't survive it. So, that was challenging, the same month that we had the GFC.
Yeah, right. So you're in Houston with a, infant daughter. All this is going on. How does it hold together? How do you not just go, fuck it, it's all too hard, let it all fall apart?
I think you just run on adrenaline mostly, and you just I never give up. Like it's like, well, this is what I've got to do, and that's what we'll do. So yeah, that was tricky because the US has really complex laws, in terms of a foreigner passing away. So we eventually got Mark home. And proceeded to pick up the pieces and carry on. And I think for me, I always found strength in knowing, I always knew what Mark would want me to do. So that was something that I just kind of held on to. And as a partnership, we always worked really well together. And if one felt more strongly about the direction than the other, then the other would go, well, okay, all right, well, I'll get behind that. So we were very lucky in that regard that we worked so well together.
What was your approach to facing cancer while he was alive?
I mean, he was amazing in terms of his positive attitude towards having cancer, and he always made it easy for me. You see some people when they have cancer, and often their carer or the people closest to them bear the brunt of it, but he was always amazing.
What did he used to say?
I mean, there was, for us, when we went to Houston, it was never an option of him not coming home. That was the plan. We were going, and he was going to have the treatment, and then we were coming home. Like, for us, there was just not an option of it not being successful. No. So I guess we didn't ever talk about that too much. And I remember when he did pass away, his sister said to me, gee, you guys must have spoken about this a lot because you know exactly what to do. And I said, actually, we didn't. It was never an option for us, but I always knew what Mark would want me to do. So I just kind of, that was my strength that got me through.
But medically, were they saying with this procedure there is a high risk that, with absence of immunity, something goes wrong, or was it a
there was
particularly unlucky incidents in Mark's case?
There was always a risk, and I think so the oncologist, just amazing people. Like, he used to come into me and say, how's Superwoman going today? They're just incredible. And he had, the second stem cell transplant was relatively new for them as well, but he had, I think he'd had 4 survive it, and they'd all been alive for maybe 5+ years. So it was high risk, but for us,
absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
How did you grieve with so much going on?
I don't remember.
No.
Look, it's a process, and everyone does it differently. And I think, I think I'm still grieving now, but I don't think it's anything. I think about it a lot, actually. And I know a couple of people, like Nick, and another friend who's lost her partner. And it's interesting. I don't think you ever stop grieving. Like, there's always for me, I don't. You go through the raw emotion of the initial grief, but I think for me, I just got up and carried on. I couldn't stop. I had a 10-year-old daughter that I had to make sure that, that was my priority, to make sure that she was doing okay. I had a business that was, a big business, and I had a big team around me. So I was lucky in that regard, but I had to just keep going. So, there was times where it was more difficult to kind of keep your head above water, but...
Did you ever hit a wall?
Not yet.
Just runs through them.
Yeah. No, I just didn't have that opportunity. It was, and again, it was never an option for me. I just didn't have that luxury of hitting a wall and collapsing. I just had to keep going.
I guess, and there's that sort of, there's a whole different logistical complication, you were having to deal with too, being over there, and like you said, there were tricky, bureaucratic things you had to deal with about getting Mark home. And
we literally picked Mark up on the way to the airport to come home. That's how fine the timeline was. So, and I had my 10-year-old daughter with me, and I was like, what am I going to tell Margo? So we'd arranged to have Mark cremated, and I just said to her, we're going to pick up Daddy's spirit and take him home.
We'll fly on back on the same plane.
Yeah, and we get to the airport, and we're sitting having a coffee, and I looked down, and they had given him to me in a paper bag, and I was just like, I am not taking Mark home in a paper bag. And there was a MoMA shop across from where we were sitting, so I went and bought him this lovely tote bag and thought, right, he would be much
flying home in style.
Yeah, exactly.
So you two must relate to each other on a deep level.
Oh yeah, there's that connection. There's all sorts of connections here, with Kim and I. But yeah, that's part of it for sure. And I just think it is, when you say how do you grieve, and I think that answer I don't remember is always the right answer in a way. There's just a period there where you even try and go think back on it and then hang on, what was I doing? Where was I?
Yeah. How was I feeling?
Yeah, I don't. There's a period. Don't ask me what was happening through that period, because I don't really recall. And
I think that's a bit of a survival technique as well. And I don't really want to recall how I was feeling back then, it was tough.
Yeah, and it's, I guess, the one thing you always say to people when they're going through a similar thing is that whatever you do is whatever you do. Everyone gets through it in their own particular way, and don't worry about, is there a right way or a wrong way to do this? The right way is just get through it, come out the other side, and however you do that, well then that's the right way for you.
Yeah, and make sure your little people are okay. I think that's, for me, having Margo to guide through that time as a single parent, but also too having that reassurance of knowing what Mark would want me to do. I think that was very comforting for me.
And they were very close.
They were.
Those two.
Yeah. She's very much like her dad.
How's that sense of what Mark would have said or what Mark would have wanted guided you since then?
Probably less than it did because it's such a different landscape now. So I've kind of had to reinvent what we're doing and where we're going quite a few times along the way. I still, and because we'd worked together for so long and we had a very unique style of how we ran our business and we were very dedicated and hands-on, I think that working with Mark taught me that if things aren't apparent to begin with, just wait a bit and everything does become apparent. So not rushing in, I think just sitting back. Some people might call that procrastination, but, I think it's being considered, thinking about, or just giving yourself the space to think things through instead of, behaving in a knee-jerk kind of way.
Yeah. Well, and then I guess, and then, eventually through these sorts of things, dust does settle, and then you're starting to think, like we're saying, you're talking about the American market and, which is such an important part of your business, and then things start to, get tough over there, and you're having to spend more time, in that market and, work it harder than perhaps you've done, and you're doing it on your own.
Yeah.
What were the challenges around that?
I mean, traveling so much when I had a young daughter was challenging. However, at that stage, we'd moved to Adelaide. Margo was about to go into year 7 at Padthaway Primary School and have the same teacher she'd had for the 2 previous years. And because she had travelled with us a lot, I think she'd sort of outgrown the Padthaway Primary School a little bit. And she was sort of always beyond her years as she was growing up. And she said to me, Mum, I really want to go to Pembroke this year. And I said, okay, I'm not ready to move to Adelaide there yet. She said, oh, well, I'll board. Okay. So I ended up going up to driving from Padthaway to Adelaide every Wednesday night, and because she hated boarding, of course. And later that year I moved, so that was easier for me to travel logistically, but not as easy to manage Margo because we don't have any family in Adelaide. My family's in New Zealand, so I used to just fly my mother over from New Zealand for 3 weeks, and she live in the house with Margo. So that was great because Margo got time with her, and that meant that I could feel confident that she was being looked after. Yeah, and I think also too because it had been so intense for me, and as a single parent and then running the business, I think it was good for me to sort of get away and have a little bit of time to myself as well. So it was sort of quite therapeutic in a way. And at the time, our wines were being really well received in the US. The market still loved Australian wines. So it was fun. I travelled with a lot of fun people, and a lot of them I'm still very good friends with now. So, I mean, which is...
Road warriors.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I look back and think, I don't know that I could do all that now. Like we used to have, at one point, we'd have a portfolio trip for 12 or 14 days, and there'd be 50 people from wineries all around the world, which were part of my importer's portfolio. And I remember the first one I did, our importer got up and said, okay, so everyone needs to respect everyone else, and the timetable, I think he was referring to the Italians when he was talking about the timetable. And he said, and just remember, we've got 50 type A personalities. So, consider everyone else. But I've got, really lovely friends out of all of that travel, from Spain, Portugal, Chile. That's part of one of the wonderful things of our industry is the camaraderie.
But it's physically hard work too, day on day, night on night.
And those trips were because we would go out for dinner and then we'd go and, to a bar, and then the next day you're up at 5 o'clock. And even if you were on a trip where you're just going into the market every day and meeting a new rep, so, typically your day would start with being picked up from the hotel by somebody you'd not met before. And I always used to think, I always used to know how my day was going by the state of their car. So if the car was clean and they had a bottle of water for you, I thought, right, this is going to be perfect. It's going to be well organised. We're going to hit some accounts. And if their car was really messy, I thought, oh, no, this is going to be
a waste of time.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, and that just in itself, being in a car all day with somebody that you've just met, that's you're selling yourself to them.
Yeah.
And then you're going into different accounts and selling the wine. And then you'd have an event in the evening, and then they'd want to go out and drink cocktails with you, and, it's all fun for them. And then I have to, it's repeat. So
you're always performing.
Yeah.
And kind of hard on the liver as well.
Yeah. Well, I used to have a bit of a ritual when I travelled. I would, no carbs, lots of green tea and water, just to try and balance things out a little bit.
Yeah. Where's the bit of Kim Longbottom that you keep for yourself when you're having to put that much of it out there? Is it important to try and just keep a little bit for yourself, quite a part of you that doesn't have to be part of the performance?
Depending on the event, I think, I was always measured. If you were hosting a dinner or a tasting, I was always quite measured with how much of myself I gave. But then if you're at a bar and you'd got on particularly well with the rep that you've been with all day, then, they get to see the real Kim Longbottom. Yeah. So
the real Kim Longbottom emerges in a bar. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it is.
It's true.
It's like the real Nick Ryan.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah.
Is that a dancing on the tables type character?
Oh, God, no, I'm not that flamboyant. No, it's just drinking margaritas and martinis, and, I guess the humour comes out a bit more.
Yep.
And, let the fun times begin.
When did Margo show an interest in the family business?
Like me, I mean, she's always been, and Mark, always grew up around food and wine and that kind of culture. So when we would have dinner at night, we would always have wine. And right from when Margo was 6 or 7, Mark would always ask her what the wine was so she'd smell it. And she got actually pretty good at, working out. First of all, everything was Shiraz, and then she worked out if it was white, it was most likely to be Chardonnay. And then sort of progressed from there. And then I guess she travelled with me a lot as well. I'm not sure how I managed that, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did that work?
Yeah, well, she was a little bit older then, so she would kind of come with me, or I'd leave her to do things on her own. It was when she was at high school. Or I would go specifically for a sales meeting in Napa, so it'll be a 3-day event. So she would come with me and hang out with my importer's family during the day. And then we'd sort of holiday after that. So from there, when she sort of came of legal drinking age, and she'd had the odd glass of wine before, on a Friday night, I would always cook something a little bit nicer for our dinner, and I would ask her to go and select a wine, and she'd always come back with what she called Dad's wine. So after Mark passed away, we, as a tribute to him, we made a wine in his honour, and it was called Magnus, which means great. But that was, to her, that was Dad's wine. And I'm like, okay, a big Shiraz with this delicious fish dish, of course. Yeah, so then she progressed from there, and as you know, her and her friends would go out, they would always pass her the wine list. So I guess that's where, I find it interesting that everyone's saying that the age group are drinking less and they're drinking less wine. I don't see that. I think they need to drill down on the numbers a little bit more. Yeah. They're kind of broad stroking it. But all of her friends drink mostly wine. They don't drink.
Probably just drink better wine than, I did it, no, they certainly drink better wine than I would have at, similar kind of age and stage, I think.
Yeah, and I think now with bar prices, like the price of cocktails, I mean, I think it's, for them it's way cheaper to go out and buy a bottle, pay corkage. They drink a lot of East End cellars where they can go and grab something from the fridge or off the shelf, pay corkage, and, they're still way in front as opposed to drinking 5 cocktails, I mean, that's got to cost you over $100.
Yeah, gone are the $1 Skittle bombs. You can't get those anymore.
And she's got a great, design eye, Margo, and always had an interest in fashion, and
she does.
And has that, manifest itself in Vintage Longbottom?
It does, and she has right from the get-go. Like, she's just always had an eye for detail and a really good sense of what looks great. And I remember at Mark's memorial, we invited a few people to speak, and Mark and I had built a few years previous, we'd built this fabulous cellar door in Padthaway. And I remember a friend got up and said, how proud he was of what we'd achieved. And he said, and you all might look around and think that this is, a lot of this, the environment that we're in is Kim, but it was also Mark as well. So he also had a really good eye for what looked great. He had really good taste. I guess he was so humble and unassuming. A lot of people didn't see that. They didn't sort of scratch below the surface with Mark.
Yeah, see the farmer first and only the farmer.
Course. Yeah. So, I mean, she's always been around that. And then in terms of coming into Vintage Longbottom, she's, just that aesthetic eye. She knows what looks good, what doesn't, and I'll always bounce ideas off her, or she'll come up with really great ideas, and especially at our tasting room as well, what looks good, what doesn't, even, with what we should have on the menu. Yeah, in a way, I kind of bounce things off Margo like I would have Mark.
And probably, from a particularly young age. I mean, she's always, seen, she grew up fast. Margo seemed to sort of have to grow up. She's always seemed like you said, mature beyond her years, and the partnership the two of you have is quite sort of unique in a way, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
It has its moments, I'm sure.
Yeah, mostly for better. I think, it is a very intense dynamic because we don't have a lot of family around us. So it's always just been us. So, and working together, it has its challenges, but it has, for the challenges, it certainly has more strengths.
What's it done for your relationship working together?
I think
stress tested it.
Yeah, stress tested for sure on a daily basis. No, I think
hi, Margo. And you're listening.
We've kind of worked out where each other adds value, and we just kind of work through it. I think that's the best way to describe it. And being the mother in the relationship, I can see when I'm kind of getting on her nerves a little bit. So I might say, look, how about you go off and, do something, because we're based in our little tasting room in Dulwich. So I can see when I'm being irritating.
Makes that obvious.
Yeah. Well, not so much, but I can see
Oh, no, she's got an ability to make her displeasure known, Margo. She's one of the great eye rollers.
Yeah, for sure. But no, look, it works well. And Margo, it can be a little bit like Mark, can be a little bit introverted sometimes. And I remember when we opened our tasting room, so we opened it as a little wine bar on Thursday and Friday night, and I thought, oh, this will be interesting to see if Margo's going to be shy with our customers, and I just remember looking around thinking, who is that? She just took to it like a duck to water, and she's fabulous with the people, and very customer service focused, and I think it's been really good for her confidence.
I'm struck when you talk about the oncologist at the hospital saying how's Superwoman today, and in a lot of ways you are, but there are fallibilities and stuff there as well. I mean, you've had your own health issues and things you've had to work through.
Yeah, I have. So a couple of years after Mark passed away, I felt like I was sort of coming through the raw grief period, I guess, and sort of felt I was coming out of that, and had just had a couple of little health issues, had a really kind of numb finger, and went to my GP, and she sent me off for an MRI, and went back and got the results, and I was diagnosed with MS, and it just flattened me. I was like, oh my God, I knew nothing about MS, and I was just so terrified of what may happen. And also, what was I going to tell Margo? So that was a lot to process. I just remember ringing a dear friend because they'd slotted me in to see a neurologist at 7:30, and I just came out and thought, oh, like that was just so much to process, and it's just like, really? So I remember calling a friend early in the morning, couldn't talk. I was just like, ooh, and he said to me, no, hang on a minute. He said, he was actually a dear friend and also my accountant. He said, I've got a client whose wife has MS. She's in her mid-60s and they've got a small farm. He said, let's just think of this through a bit. And he said, why don't I get your second opinion? So he arranged for an appointment to go and see a GP in Narracort, and he explained it really well because MS, everyone's path is different, and there's a few different types of MS. So I went to see the GP, felt a lot more confident about my diagnosis after that, and went to see another neurologist who is an absolute rock star. I went to see him, and he said, right, okay, so this is what we're going to do, and we're going to put you on this for 2 years, and then there's this, all of these new drugs, there's going to be an explosion of new drugs in the next 5 years, so we'll put you on this for 2 years, and then we'll switch you to something else. So I was like, right, okay, all is not lost here. So I actually didn't tell Margo for 2 years. I just thought she just does not need to know that at her age. So I used to go and have transfusions once a month, and it happened to, one of them towards the end of the 2-year period happened to fall on my birthday, and we always would spend my birthdays together. And I thought, I'm going to have to tell her now. I think she was 13 or 14 at that stage. Yeah, but I'm one of the lucky ones with MS that I don't have very severe symptoms. In fact, I have a good friend that has said to me on several occasions, I think you're a fraud. I think I don't think you have it at all. I think it's attention seeking. But no, I am very lucky. And my philosophy is with being diagnosed with MS, once I got my head around it, was that there's a hell of a lot of other things I could have been diagnosed with that are much worse. So, yeah, I mean, that was 14 years ago. And
that's proven to be true with better treatments becoming available.
Amazing. They're so sophisticated now, the drugs that are available. I'm actually not on any medication at the moment. I go back to see my neurologist in a couple of weeks, but I went on this new medication about 18 months ago where I took 5 tablets a tablet a day for 5 days, nothing for a month, and then repeated that. Nothing for 12 months, and then went back and did that whole tablet a day. And then I haven't been on medication since, so I'm going for a checkup, and if everything's fine, which, touch wood it is, I won't ever have to be on any medication unless I have a relapse, which, that's part of the MS journey, is you don't really know whether, it could worsen. I'm just very lucky that I'm in remission.
Keep it at bay with margaritas and martinis.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's part of the
Work so far.
Yeah.
You might be a medical miracle.
Yeah. It's all about balance, isn't it?
Yeah. Balance in everything, Kim. Balance in everything.
Yeah.
So what's the immediate future for Vintage Longbottom?
It's been a tough few years for everyone, I guess, anchoring it back to COVID. But, it probably started before then. For me, it's been quite the journey. And I turned, for me in 2018, I turned 50, and Margo and I went to France for a month. And it just gave me that clarity of being outside of what I'd been kind of driving my way through. I just thought, I'm driving up and down the highway to Padthaway all the time. Margo was 19, just turned 19, or was about to turn 19, and was quite keen to have some sort of part in the business and help out. And I thought, it's time for a new chapter. So we kind of reinvented Vintage Longbottom. Well, back then it was called Henry's Drive. So we started a company called Vintage Longbottom, which was like the overarching brand. And then we had a few brands under that. So, and we decided that we would change regions. So our whites are now made from the Adelaide Hills and our reds from McLaren Vale. So, that was quite a journey to embark on. And, sort of changing the whole DNA of the wine business. I think it's been a really exciting journey. And apart from the fact that where the global market's been in the last sort of, 4 to 5 years, for us coming into 2025, we decided that we also needed to make a few more changes and tweak what we'd sort of done in 2018. And I think, years ago, a friend of mine said to me, change is the only constant. And I think, it's in a time like we're in at the moment where the market is at, you've got to be constantly evolving and changing. And if it's not working, look at why it's not working. So for us, we decided that we would change our winemaking consultant. So we're now having our wines made up in Lobethal by Turon White, and we're very excited about that. I think, he's in age between Margo and I think that's lovely for Margo to have somebody that, she can talk to.
More, yeah.
Love his
Not
wine.
just mum's consultant, but
yes,
one that you can both connect to.
Yeah, and I thought that was really important when we looked at making some changes. That I'm really excited and reinvigorated about the 25 vintage and how we've changed the winemaking to be bottling earlier, getting the wines out in the market, slightly different in style, a little bit fresher, more energetic contemporary wines. So that's really exciting for us. So I think it's kind of like a bit of a reset for us, or a relaunch, I guess.
Yep.
And that's what, kicking off in September, that's what we're doing in our tasting room as well. So bringing in our new wines. So we'll kind of roll those out over the next 6 months. And what an amazing vintage to do that on, like 25. It's, I guess you hear winemakers say that all the time. But for me, this vintage, it's as significant to us as our first vintage in 98 in terms of, like the excitement around it and the quality of the vintage. And then I have a few other favourites along the way. But 25 is, I can't wait to get those wines in bottle.
Can't wait to see them.
Yeah, I think for me, hitting the US market will be a big target for me next year. I've got a couple of volume wines that are not part of what we're doing at Lobethal, but more designed for the supermarket kind of environment. So I'd really like to launch those in the US next year. But I'm just kind of doing that in a very considered way. Yeah, because rushing in is not really, it's like what I talked about before. It's, just sitting back and assessing the situation before leaping in.
Yeah, it's going to be hard work, but if anyone can do it, it's you, kid.
Oh, I don't know.
It's you.
Yeah, you've certainly proven that.
Yeah, I thank you. I guess too, as the older you get, the more I guess risk averse and probably mature and sensible too. Like
that's why you need Margo.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's right. We sort of balance each other out in that regard, but. Yeah, I always think there's a way from A to B, and the worst thing you can tell me is, I can't do it, because I'll always find a way. There's always a way. Even if you have to go right around to get to B, I'll get there.
You get there. I reckon that's a perfect way to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, thank you. It's been lovely to chat.
Thanks for listening. Head to the Wine Grape Council of South Australia website for links and further resources. This is part of a bigger conversation, so feel free to share this podcast with your mates and look after yourselves. Cheers.